My name is Catherine, and I'm 32 years old, a mother of two beautiful children, and a CEO with a life that looked perfect on paper. But behind closed doors, my family saw me as nothing more than a bank account. I gave them everything: a beautiful home, financial security, and every dollar they ever asked for, all to win a love they had already given to someone else. My younger brother was their golden child, and his son, my nephew, was their golden grandchild. I had no idea that their cruel favoritism would one day force my own children out into the cold on a beautiful Christmas Eve. The night they betrayed me, I didn't get angry. I just got quiet, because I knew they had no idea what was coming next. This is the story of how my family tried to break me, and how I broke them instead. This is a story about a woman who gave up everything only to lose it all to the ones she loved most. But what they didn't realize was that I had a plan that would change everything, and it started with a single phone call. Let me take you back to where it began. If you looked at my life from the outside, you'd probably think I have it all. I'm the CEO of my own company, a private clinic called Hopewell Health, in a nice suburban town in Connecticut. We specialize in pediatric care, and we do good work. Real good work. It took a lot of late nights and a lot of sacrifices to get here. I graduated at the top of my class, worked 2 jobs while raising 2 kids on my own, and started this whole thing with nothing but a shoestring budget and a mountain of student debt. Every dollar I made, I earned. Every success I have, I built it with my own 2 hands. But none of that seemed to matter to my family. The fact is, for as long as I can remember, I've been the one holding everything together. From the time I was a little girl, my parents, Martha and Richard, always looked to me to be the responsible one. If something went wrong, I was the one who had to fix it. If someone needed a favor, I was the one who had to do it. My little brother Patrick was the exact opposite. He was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. He was 2 years younger than me, but he acted like he was 10. He never had to lift a finger, never had to think about a single consequence. If he got into trouble, my parents would laugh it off as just boys being boys. If I got a B on a test, it was a lecture about how I needed to work harder. It was a pattern that never stopped. I worked and worked while Patrick drifted from one dead-end job to another, always with a new excuse about why this one wasn't right for him. He was a bright kid, really. He could have done anything he wanted, but he never had to. He knew my parents would always bail him out, and for years I watched it happen. Then, about 5 years ago, I decided to do something big. I had a vision for a healthcare model that put patients first, and I found some partners who believed in it too. It was risky, and it was the hardest thing I've ever done, but it paid off. Hopewell Health was a success, and with that success came the kind of money I'd only ever dreamed of. The first thing I did was buy my parents a house. They had been living in a small, cramped apartment for years, and I wanted to give them something better. I found a beautiful 3-bedroom condo in a great neighborhood, and I put the down payment on it myself. It was my gift to them, a way of saying thank you for everything they had done. I thought it would make them happy. I thought it would make us closer. For a little while it did. My parents were so proud to show off their new place, and I felt good knowing they were comfortable. I also paid their bills every month, from the mortgage to the utilities. It was a lot, but I could afford it, and I figured they deserved to live a life of comfort after working so hard. What I didn't realize was that I was setting a precedent, a very dangerous one. I wasn't just their daughter anymore. I was their personal ATM. The real trouble started about 6 months ago, when Patrick and his wife Lauren announced they were expecting their first child. My parents were over the moon. Suddenly, every conversation was about the baby, about Ethan, and how perfect he was going to be. It was the same old story, only with a new character. My parents had already given him a title before he was even born, the golden grandchild. It made me sick to my stomach because I knew what that meant for my own kids, for Jake and Haley. They would be pushed to the side just like I had been. I told myself it would be different, that my parents would never do that to their own grandkids. I told myself that they loved Jake and Haley too much, but deep down I knew I was lying to myself. I had been living with that feeling of being a second-class citizen in my own family for so long that it felt almost normal. I figured I could handle a little more of it. What I didn't know was just how far they were willing to go. The holiday season was already in full swing. The house was decorated with lights and garlands, and every store was playing Christmas music. It was supposed to be a time of joy and togetherness, but for my family, it was a countdown to a complete disaster. It was a disaster that would change everything, and it was a disaster that I was about to walk right into. I just didn't know it yet. Just 2 days before Thanksgiving, Patrick and Lauren made the official announcement. They were going to move in with my parents. Not for a few weeks, not for a few months, but indefinitely. They had sold their apartment in Boston and needed a place to stay while they figured things out. My parents, of course, were thrilled. They didn't even consult me. They just told me it was happening. I was too stunned to argue. A week later, a moving truck pulled up to the condo I had bought for my parents. I was there with Jake and Haley, and my parents were practically bouncing with excitement. Patrick and Lauren's things poured out of the truck, box after box of designer furniture, expensive baby gear, and things that looked like they belonged in a magazine. I remember seeing a brand new gleaming white high chair that must have cost at least $500. My parents ooped and ahed over every single item, talking about how Ethan was going to love it all. Meanwhile, my own kids were standing there quietly holding a couple of their old, slightly scuffed toys. Jake had a chipped plastic race car, and Haley was clutching her favorite doll whose hair was a tangled mess from years of love. No one even noticed them. It was as if they were invisible. That was the moment it started to feel real. The shift. The moment my family, the one I had worked so hard to keep together, was splitting into two distinct groups. On one side was Patrick, Lauren, and their precious Ethan, the VIPs. On the other side were Jake, Haley, and me, the afterthought. The first few weeks were a blur of chaos. The house was constantly loud, but not with happy sounds. It was the sound of Patrick and Lauren arguing about where to put their things, or the sound of my mom, Martha, shushing my kids every time they laughed too loudly. "Be quiet," she'd whisper, her eyes darting toward the baby monitor. "Ethan's sleeping." One afternoon I came home from work to find Jake looking dejected, sitting alone on the stairs. I asked him what was wrong, and he just shook his head. I saw his favorite video game console was missing from the living room. My dad, Richard, came in and explained, "Oh, we moved it down to the basement. It was a little too noisy. Patrick and Lauren need a quieter space for their work." I felt a hot wave of anger surge through me. The basement. It was cold and damp and full of storage boxes. That was where my son's things belonged now, not on the main floor where they might disturb the golden grandchild. I tried to talk to my parents about it later, but they just brushed me off. "You're making a big deal out of nothing, Catherine," my mom said with a sigh. "We just need to make a few adjustments to make sure everyone is comfortable. We all live here now." But the adjustments were only ever one way. My kids were the ones who had to give things up. They were the ones who had to be quiet. They were the ones who were being pushed out little by little. Haley, my sweet little artist, had to stop practicing the piano in the living room because it was too loud for Ethan. My dad even went so far as to cover the piano with a thick blanket. My mom told me it was just temporary, but I knew it wasn't. I knew it was a symbol of what was happening. My daughter's creativity, her joy, was being silenced to accommodate a baby who couldn't even talk yet. I felt like I was losing my mind. I would come home from a stressful day at the hospital and walk into a home that was no longer a sanctuary, but a source of constant stress and anxiety. The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. One evening, I found myself in a quiet corner of the kitchen trying to catch my breath. I had just finished dealing with a minor crisis at work, and now I had to brace myself for the one waiting for me at home. I closed my eyes and whispered to myself, "This can't go on. This can't possibly go on." I knew I needed to do something, but I couldn't just pack up and leave. I had 2 kids. To think about 2 kids who had already been through so much with my divorce. I couldn't just uproot their lives again, could I? I felt completely trapped, and for the first time in my life, I couldn't see a way out. I was so focused on trying to fix everything that I couldn't see the real problem. I couldn't see that the home I was trying to save was already broken. That was the hardest part, the feeling of being broken inside my own home. My house, the one I had bought, had become a living museum of everything I was not, and everything my kids were not. Every day felt like a lesson in how to be invisible. The lessons started with the little things. If Jake left a jacket on the couch, my dad would scold him about being messy and ungrateful. But if Patrick left his coffee cup and papers all over the dining room table, my mom would just quietly clear it away, saying that he was so busy with his online business. My kids were walking on eggshells, constantly afraid of doing something wrong. They would ask me with their sad little eyes if they could just go to their rooms to play. I would tell them of course they could. It broke my heart every single time. One Tuesday evening I came home from a particularly long day. I heard soft muffled music coming from upstairs. It was a piano, but it sounded off like someone was playing with their hands wrapped in thick blankets. I walked up the stairs following the sound and found Haley sitting at the beautiful black piano I had bought for my parents' anniversary. Her hands were moving over the keys, but the sound was muted. My mom had stuffed towels inside the piano to soften the sound so it wouldn't wake Ethan up from his nap. My sweet, talented Haley looked at me with tears in her eyes. Grandma said it was too loud, she whispered, her voice barely audible. She said I could only play when the baby was awake. I felt my blood run cold. Haley had loved that piano. She was so good at it. It was her happy place. And my parents, her own grandparents, had taken that from her. They had taken her joy and silenced it. I walked into the living room where my mom was watching television with a smug look on her face. "Mom, what is this?" I asked, my voice shaking a little. "Why did you do that to the piano?" She didn't even look away from the television screen. "Well, Ethan needs his rest, Catherine. It's for the best. We can't have him waking up all cranky." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. He's a baby, Mom. He can handle a little noise. Haley loves to play. You're taking that away from her. My mom finally turned to look at me, and her expression was pure ice. "You're always so dramatic, Catherine. Why are you so jealous of your own brother's happiness? He and Lauren have a lot on their plate, and we're just trying to help them out. You're an adult. You can handle a few minor inconveniences." She made it sound like I was the problem. She made it sound like my children's feelings were inconveniences. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about a baby's nap. It was about control. It was about power. And they were using my kids to hurt me. Later that week, I had lunch with my friend Olivia. She's a fantastic nurse at Hopewell Health, and she's one of the few people I can talk to honestly. I told her everything. I told her about the piano, about the video games, about the way my parents looked at my kids now. Olivia listened patiently, her face full of concern. When I finished, she just shook her head. "Catherine, I'm so sorry. That's not a family. They are not treating you like their daughter. They're treating you like a boarding house guest. They're just tolerating. And they're treating your kids like an annoyance." Her words hit me like a ton of bricks. A boarding house guest. She was right. I wasn't their daughter anymore. I was a resource, a bank account, a free babysitter. And my kids were just baggage that came along with me. For the rest of our lunch, we talked about what I could do. Olivia pointed out something I hadn't even considered. "You're not trapped, Catherine. You're the one with the power. You're the one who owns the house. You're the one who pays the bills. They're the ones who need you. You just need to realize that. You need to stop trying to fix everything for them and start thinking about yourself and your kids." Her words gave me a new kind of clarity. A cold, hard clarity that cut through all the confusion and all the emotional manipulation. I saw the situation for what it was, a business transaction, and I had been giving them everything while getting nothing in return. It was time for me to take back control. The next step was going to be difficult, but I knew what I had to do. I had to start making a plan. And this time, it was a plan that didn't include them. After my conversation with Olivia, a switch flipped in my brain. I stopped trying to be the perfect daughter and the perfect sister. I started being a CEO again, a woman who looks at a problem and finds a solution, not a woman who lets her emotions get the best of her. The first step was to put up a wall. I made myself emotionally unavailable to my family, which was harder than I thought it would be. I started coming home later from work. I ate dinner in my room with the kids. I went from being a constant presence to a ghost in my own house. My parents noticed, of course. My mom even tried to bring me a plate of food one night. "We miss you at dinner," she said with a forced smile. I looked at her, and all I could see was the woman who had put towels in Haley's piano. "I'm tired, Mom," I said. "It's been a long day at work." She left, but I could feel her staring at my back. I knew she didn't like losing control, not one bit. At the same time, a problem at work had started to get my full attention. We had been working on a new pediatric health program for months, a project that was a big deal for us. It was a unique approach to patient care, and we were counting on it to bring in new contracts. But a rival clinic, a smaller place called Stamford Pediatrics, seemed to be one step ahead of us at every turn. They were pitching ideas that were eerily similar to ours, almost like they had an inside scoop. I couldn't figure it out. My team was loyal. Our files were secure. I started to suspect corporate espionage, but I couldn't find any proof. Then a few days later, I was walking past Patrick's room. He had the door open just a crack, and I could hear him talking on the phone. No, they have a completely new structure for the first quarter," he was saying in a low voice. "They're going to be focusing on home visits and virtual care." My heart pounded in my chest. He was talking about Hopewell Health. He was giving away our business plan. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. I wanted to storm in there and scream at him to ask him how he could betray me like this. But I didn't. Instead, I stood there silent and listened. He hung up the phone and I heard him laugh. "Yeah, that should get us a few $1,000s," he said to Lauren. "They're suckers." I walked away from the door, a cold fury rising up inside of me. My own brother. He was selling my company's secrets for a few $1,000s. I went straight to my room, locked the door, and opened my laptop. I started digging into my parents' bank statements. I had set up an online account for them so I could pay their bills from my laptop, and I had access to all of their records. What I found made me want to scream. There were thousands of dollars worth of charges from a business called Ethan's Elite Baby Essentials. Designer clothes, expensive toys, and organic food subscription that cost over $600 a month. My parents were blowing through my money like it was water, all of it for their golden grandchild. I scrolled through the statements and found something else. Regular deposits every few weeks from Stamford Pediatrics. Not much, just a few $100s here and there, but enough to show a pattern. Enough to confirm my suspicion. My brother wasn't just a lazy freeloader, he was a thief. And my parents, the ones who had raised me, the ones who had promised to love me, were covering for him. They knew he was selling my company's secrets, and they let it happen. I closed my laptop, my hands shaking. This was no longer just about a family feud. This was about criminal activity. This was about a complete and utter lack of morals. They weren't just taking my money. They were actively trying to hurt my business, my livelihood, my entire future. I walked to the window and looked out at the street. The Christmas lights were twinkling on the trees, and the houses were glowing with a warm, festive light. People were laughing, getting ready to spend the holidays with their loved ones. And here I was trapped in a house, with people who had betrayed me in a way I never thought possible. But I wasn't trapped. I had the power. I had the truth. And now I had a real plan. It wasn't just about leaving anymore. It was about making them pay. I knew what I had to do, and I knew I had to do it before Christmas. The twinkling lights outside did nothing to warm the cold, hard certainty that had settled in my gut. I wasn't just angry anymore. Anger was hot and wild. This was cold and still. It was a plan. I started by doing what I do best. I became a strategist. For the next week, I worked from my laptop every night after everyone else in the house had gone to bed. I waited for the sounds of snoring to start in my parents' room, for the murmur of the television to stop in Patrick and Lauren's suite. Then I would open my computer and get to work. I had to be silent, a ghost in my own house. I pulled up every financial document I could find. My personal bank accounts, my business accounts, the deed to the condo. I went through years of statements line by line. I had always been so trusting. My parents had asked me to just send them the money for the bills, and I had done it without a second thought. My generosity had been a blank check for their laziness. But as I scrolled through the records, I felt a sense of calm. The condo. My name was the only one on the deed. It was not a joint account, it was mine. My parents were living in a house that belonged to me, and they had no idea. I looked at the mortgage payments, the utility bills, the maintenance fees. I had paid for every single thing. The thousands of dollars I had been sending them every month were just an allowance. I had no idea they had been spending it all on expensive baby gear and whatever else they wanted for Patrick and Lauren. The numbers didn't lie. I spent the rest of the night creating a spreadsheet, a detailed log of every dollar I had given them. I noted every payment, every gift, every cent I had spent to keep their little kingdom running. It was a chilling document to look at. It was a record of my love, and it was a record of their betrayal. The next morning, I called a lawyer, a man named Mr. Thompson. I told him I needed to discuss a real estate matter and some family legal planning. I set up a meeting for the following afternoon. I didn't tell him the full story over the phone. I just gave him enough information to make him curious. He sounded professional and efficient, exactly what I needed. My meeting with Mr. Thompson was a blur. His office was a clean, modern space with a view of the city. I laid it all out for him. The condo, the payments, the endless stream of money, the fact that my brother and his wife were living there now, and the worst part that they had been stealing from my company. I told him about the bank statements and the documents I had found. I watched his face as he listened. He was a good lawyer because he didn't show any emotion. He just listened. When I was done, he sat back in his chair and looked at me. "Miss Hayes," he said, "the law is very clear on this. The property is in your name. You have paid for it and you have the documents to prove it. You have every right to do with it as you see fit." I felt a quiet sense of triumph. "And the financial support?" I asked. "The money I've been giving them that is a gift," he said. "You have no legal obligation to continue providing it. You can stop whenever you want. And as for your brother, if you have proof of him selling company secrets, that is a whole different matter. That is a serious crime. Do you have proof?" I nodded and slid a folder across his desk. Inside were the bank statements highlighted with all the payments. He looked them over, a small frown on his face. He leaned back in his chair again. "You've been very thorough, Miss Hayes. Most people don't come in with this much information. It seems you have a very solid case." I knew what I had to do next. I had to serve them with a formal notice to vacate the premises, and I had to stop their financial support. I had to cut them off. It was the only way to make them understand. I told Mr. Thompson what I wanted to do, and he gave me a few options. I walked out of his office with a plan in hand. The world outside looked different now. The cars, the people, the buildings, they weren't just a part of the background anymore. They were part of a world I had a place, in a world I had earned. I felt a sense of power I hadn't felt in years. I was no longer the little girl who had to fix everything. I was a CEO, a business owner, a mother who was about to fight for her children. I was ready. After I left the lawyer's office, the feeling of empowerment was still with me. It was a shield protecting me from the emotional wreckage waiting for me back home. I knew what I had to do. The plan was in motion. The final deadline was Christmas Eve. I had just 2 days left to make my move. When I got home, the house was a mess. It was always a mess now. Patrick and Lauren's things were everywhere. Their baby gear had taken over the living room, their paperwork was spread out on the dining table. I walked through the chaos feeling a sense of quiet detachment. I wasn't angry anymore. I was just focused. Dinner that night was a tense affair. The 5 of us sat around the dining table with an empty chair where my parents were supposed to be. They were in the living room cooing at Ethan. They had made a new rule that Ethan needed a calm atmosphere for dinner, and apparently my kids were too much to handle. "I can't believe they won't even eat with us," Jake whispered to me. "They just want to be with Ethan." My heart ached for him. "It's okay, honey," I said, my voice as calm as I could make it. "We'll have our own dinner." Patrick and Lauren just ignored us talking over our heads about some new gadget they wanted for Ethan. I felt the familiar burn of frustration, but I held my tongue. I knew my time to talk was coming. Then Patrick turned to me, a smirk on his face. "So, Catherine," he said, his voice dripping with condescension, "you know this apartment is getting a little cramped. Lauren and I were talking, and we really need a bigger space. It's not really fair for us to have to work from a dining table when you have a whole home office to yourself. I looked at him, surprised by his audacity. He was essentially telling me to give him my home office in the house that I paid for. I took a deep breath. "This is a 3-bedroom apartment, Patrick," I said. "There's plenty of room." Lauren chimed in, her voice sweet as sugar but with a sharp edge. "Oh, but Catherine, you don't understand. We have a baby now. He needs his own space. He needs a nursery, a playroom. We just don't have enough room here." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You have your own bedroom," I said, my voice still calm. "And you have the living room and the kitchen. What else do you need?" Patrick laughed, a cold, empty sound. "What else do we need? We need space for our stuff, Catherine. We need space for our lives. We can't just live on top of each other forever. You have a huge house. You have a lot of money. You could just buy us a bigger place. It would be so much easier for everyone." The sheer nerve of him. He was not asking, he was demanding, and he was doing it right in front of my kids. My hands were shaking under the table. I looked at Jake and Haley. Jake's face was white and Haley's eyes were wide with fear. They were terrified. I knew I couldn't let this go on. "I'm not buying you a house, Patrick," I said, my voice firm. "You're an adult. You need to take responsibility for your own life. This is not my problem." The words hung in the air for a moment. Patrick's face flushed with anger. "How dare you?" he said, his voice rising. "I work all the time. I'm a provider. I'm a father. I have a family to take care of. You don't know what that's like, Catherine. You don't know anything about being a real parent. You don't know how to raise kids." That was it. That was the line. He had attacked me, my life, my kids. He had said the one thing that was unforgivable. All the anger I had been holding back, all the hurt, all the betrayal, it all came to a head. I stood up from the table, my hands clenched into fists. I looked at my brother, the man I had spent my entire life protecting. "You listen to me, Patrick," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "You have no idea what it's like to be a parent. You have no idea what it's like to have to fight for your children. You have no idea what it's like to be me." My parents came rushing in from the living room. "What's going on here, my dad?" asked, his face red with anger. "Why are you yelling at your brother, Catherine?" "I'm not yelling," I said, my voice still low. "I'm just telling him the truth. And the truth is, he's a thief and he's a coward. He's a parasite and he's a terrible father." The air went out of the room. My parents stared at me, their faces a mask of shock and disbelief. Patrick just stared at me with pure hatred. I knew what I had to do. I couldn't stay here anymore. Not for another minute. Not for another second. I had to get my kids out. I had to get us out of this house and away from these people. It was the only way to save us. After my words hung in the air, the silence was deafening. I didn't wait for a response. I turned on my heel and walked out of the room, up the stairs and into my kids' bedroom. I closed the door behind me and locked it. I sank to the floor, my back against the cold wood, trying to catch my breath. I had said it. I had finally said the truth. The relief was immense, but it was quickly replaced by a wave of pure, unadulterated fear. What now? I stayed in the room for a long time, just listening. I could hear them talking downstairs, the low murmur of voices rising and falling. I couldn't make out the words, but I didn't need to. I knew what they were saying. They were talking about me, about how crazy I was, about how ungrateful I was, about how I was tearing the family apart. They were the victims now, and I was the villain. I stayed in the room for the rest of the night. I didn't come out for dinner. I didn't come out to say goodnight. I just stayed there in the dark with my kids sleeping soundly in their beds. I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in weeks. I was in my own little bubble, and no one could get in. The next day was Christmas Eve. I had a 12-hour shift at the hospital. I woke up early before anyone else was awake and got ready. I went into the kids' room and kissed them both on the forehead. I whispered in their ears that I loved them and that I would be home as soon as I could. They just mumbled in their sleep, and I smiled. It was a perfect moment, a perfect bubble of peace before the storm. I drove to the hospital in a daze. The world outside was so festive, so bright, but all I could think about was the dark house I had left behind. I knew I couldn't go back there. Not ever. I had to get us out. I just had to find a way. My shift was a blur. I was so distracted I made a few mistakes. Nothing major, but enough to get a stern look from one of the other nurses. "You okay, Catherine?" she asked, her voice full of concern. "You seem a little off today." "I'm fine," I said, forcing a smile. "Just a long night." She didn't press it. The day went on, and I went on with it. I gave injections. I checked charts. I talked to parents. My body was on autopilot, but my mind was a million miles away. Around 7 o'clock that evening, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a video call from Haley. I was surprised. My kids never called me at work. I took a deep breath and stepped into a quiet room. I answered the call and my heart dropped into my stomach. Haley's face was on the screen, but it was not the happy, smiling face I knew and loved. Her cheeks were streaked with tears, and her eyes were red and puffy. She was shivering, and her teeth were chattering. "Mommy," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of the wind. "Please, can you come home, Haley? What's wrong?" I asked, my voice a mix of fear and confusion. "Where are you?" She just shook her head, her face a mask of misery. "We're in the shed," she whispered. "In the backyard." "It's so cold, Mommy. They made us leave." My blood ran cold. The shed. The old rickety shed in the backyard. It was full of rusty tools and old furniture. It was not insulated. It was freezing cold outside. "Haley, who made you leave?" I asked, my voice a whisper. "Grandma and Grandpa," she said, her voice breaking. "And Uncle Patrick. They said they needed our rooms. They needed to make space for all of Ethan's new toys. They said we were too messy, they said. They said we weren't a real family." I felt a cold rage rise up inside of me. They hadn't just moved their things, they had kicked them out. On Christmas Eve, I looked at my daughter's face on the screen, at her shaking hands, and I felt a wave of nausea. "Haley, honey, listen to me," I said, my voice as calm as I could make it. "Are you okay? Is Jake okay?" "We're cold, Mommy," she said, a sob escaping her lips. "And we're hungry. They didn't give us any dinner." That was it. That was the final blow. They had not only kicked them out, they had left them outside in the cold without food. The betrayal was complete. It was no longer about money or a house. It was about pure, unadulterated cruelty. I felt a fire ignite inside of me, a rage so powerful it almost blinded me. "Haley, listen to me," I said, my voice full of a new kind of certainty. "I'm coming home. I'm coming home right now. Don't worry, Mommy's coming to get you." I hung up the phone and walked out of the room. I walked to my car, my mind a blur. I didn't care about anything else. Not my job, not my family. All I cared about was my kids. I was going to get them. And then I was going to show my family what it was like to cross a mother. The 20-minute drive home was a blur of red lights and a white-knuckled grip on the steering wheel. All I could think about was the image of my daughter's face on the screen, her little body shivering in the cold. My mind was a storm of pure, blinding rage. Every single wrong they had ever done to me, every lie, every insult, every time they chose Patrick over me, it all came rushing back. But none of that mattered. All that mattered was my kids. I pulled into the driveway, the tires crunching on the gravel. The house was lit up like a Christmas tree, the windows glowing with a warm, inviting light. It was a perfect festive scene, but I knew what was happening inside. It was a lie. I slammed the car door shut and ran to the backyard. I didn't care if they heard me. I just ran. I found them in the old rickety shed at the back of the property. The door was ajar and a small sliver of light from the house spilled inside. I pushed the door open and saw them. Jake and Haley were huddled together on the damp concrete floor, wrapped in a thin blanket that was probably meant for the dog. They were shivering, their faces pale and their eyes wide with fear. There were no toys, no food, no comfort. Just a pile of old tools and some rusty gardening equipment. I felt a sob rise in my throat, but I swallowed it down. I had to be strong. "Jake, Haley," I said, my voice as calm as I could make it. "Mommy's here. They looked up at me and I could see the relief in their eyes. Haley just scrambled to her feet and ran into my arms. I wrapped her in a tight hug, her little body trembling in my embrace. Jake just sat there looking up at me, his eyes full of a pain that was too old for a 10-year-old boy. "They didn't give us any dinner, Mommy," he said, his voice a whisper. "They said we didn't deserve it." That was it. That was the final insult. They had not only kicked them out, they had left them to starve. I felt a cold fury rise up inside of me, a rage so powerful it almost blinded me. I held Haley tight and walked over to Jake. I knelt down and wrapped my arms around him. "It's okay, honey," I said, my voice shaking a little. "We're going to go home. We're going to go to our real home." Just then, the back door of the house opened, and my parents and Patrick and Lauren all came out. They were all bundled up in warm coats, and they had a smug, self-satisfied look on their faces. They must have heard me and decided to come out and gloat. "What are you doing, Catherine?" my mom asked, her voice full of false concern. "You're making a big scene. It's Christmas Eve." "A big scene?" I asked, my voice dangerously low. "You put my children outside in the cold on Christmas Eve. You left them to starve. And you're asking me what I'm doing," my mom scoffed. "Oh, don't be so dramatic. They're fine. They're just being silly. We just needed to make a little room for Ethan's new toys. He needs his own space." "They're fine," I asked, my voice rising. "Look at them, Mom. Look at them. They're shivering. They're terrified." "And you're telling me they're fine?" Patrick just laughed, a cold, empty sound. "Oh, come on, Catherine. You're making this into a whole thing. They're just kids. They'll get over it. You're always so dramatic." I looked at him, and all the rage, all the hurt, all the betrayal, it all came to a head. I stood up, my kids still clinging to me. I looked at my parents, at my brother and his wife. I looked at the people who were supposed to be my family. I took a deep breath. I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I just looked at them, a calm, cold fury in my eyes. "You have no idea what it's like to be me," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You have no idea what it's like to have to fight for your children. You have no idea what it's like to be a real mother." My words hung in the air for a moment. They just stared at me, their faces a mask of shock and disbelief. They had never seen me like this before. They had never seen the woman I truly was. I turned to my kids, and I looked into their tear-filled eyes. I gave them a small, sad smile. "It's okay," I said, my voice a whisper. "It's time for us to go." I gave them a small, sad smile. "It's okay," I said, my voice a whisper. "It's time for us to go." They stood frozen, their faces a mask of shock and disbelief. My mom had her hand over her mouth, and my dad was just staring at me with a bewildered expression. Patrick's smug grin had disappeared, replaced by a look of pure confusion. They didn't move. They couldn't. They were too stunned to do anything but stare. I didn't give them a chance to react. I just took my kids' hands and walked past them, my head held high. I felt like I was walking through a field of ghosts. I was in a bubble of my own, making a bubble that was filled with my kids and the love I had for them. Nothing else mattered. I went inside the house, grabbed the 2 suitcases I had packed the night before, and put them in the trunk of my car. I went back inside, grabbed a jacket for each of the kids, and wrapped them in warm scarves. I looked at the house one last time, at the twinkling Christmas lights and the festive decorations, and I felt nothing. No nostalgia. No sadness. Just a sense of finality. I went into the kitchen and grabbed a pen and a piece of paper. I wrote a short, simple note. It said, "I am leaving. The house is on the market. The money has been cut off. Please be out in 2 weeks. I will see you in court." I didn't sign it. They would know who it was from. I left it on the kitchen counter where they would be sure to see it. I walked out of the house, took one last look at the place that had been my prison, and got into the car. I didn't look back. I just started the engine and drove away. The roads were empty and the air was still. It was Christmas Eve, and I was driving away from my family, from the only home my kids had ever known. And I felt a sense of peace, a deep, profound sense of peace. We drove for a few minutes in silence. The kids were quiet, just looking out the window at the passing lights. "Mommy, where are we going?" Haley asked, her voice small. "We're going to a friend's house," I said. "We're going to stay there for a few nights, and then we're going to go to our new home. A real home." "A real home?" Jake asked, his voice full of hope. "A real home," I said, my voice choked with emotion. "A home where we will be a family. A home where we will be loved for who we are." Just then, my phone rang. It was Patrick. I looked at the screen and felt a small, triumphant smile spread across my face. He had seen the note. He had seen the truth. I answered the phone. "Catherine! What the hell are you doing?" he screamed, his voice full of a pure, blinding rage. "Are you insane? You're leaving. On Christmas Eve. What kind of a monster are you?" I took a deep breath. "I'm not a monster, Patrick," I said, my voice calm and steady. "I'm a mother, and I'm doing what I have to do to protect my children. Protect them from what," he asked, his voice full of disbelief. "From us, from your own family. We're the ones who took you in when you had nowhere to go. We're the ones who helped you. And this is how you repay us. You just walk out on us. You just leave us to starve." "Starve?" I asked, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "You don't know the first thing about starving, Patrick. My kids were starving. They were starving for love. They were starving for a kind word. They were starving for a family. And you gave them nothing. You gave them a cold shed and an empty stomach. You gave them a lesson in what it feels like to be nothing." The phone was silent for a moment. I could hear him breathing heavily, the sound of his rage in the background. "You're making a huge mistake, Catherine," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "You have nowhere to go. You have no one to help you. You're going to fail, and you're going to come crawling back to us. And when you do, we'll be waiting. And you'll have to pay. You'll have to pay for this." I took a deep breath. "No, Patrick," I said, my voice calm and steady. "I'm not going to fail. And I'm not going to come crawling back. And I'm not going to pay. I'm going to win. And you're going to lose. You're going to lose everything. The house, the money, everything. The condo, by the way, is 100% in my name. I'm selling it and it's already on the market. You have 2 weeks to get out." The phone was silent. I could hear his gasp. He knew what that meant. He knew the truth. He knew that I had planned this. He knew that I had won. He was a thief, and I was the one who had caught him. He was a parasite, and I was the one who was cutting him off. "You're a monster," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "You're a monster, Catherine." I just smiled. "Maybe so," I said, "but at least I'm not a thief. Goodbye, Patrick." I hung up the phone and turned it off. I had said what I had to say. The silence in the car was no longer oppressive. It was a comfortable silence. A silence of freedom. My kids were with me. We were safe. And we were free. We had finally left the place where we were nothing. We were going to a new home, a new life, and this time we were going to build it all on our own. It was a new beginning, and it was going to be the best Christmas of our lives. My phone stayed off for the rest of the night. It felt good knowing I had cut that cord. The silence in my car and later in the temporary apartment I had booked was the most peaceful sound I had heard in months. The kids were exhausted but safe. I made them some hot cocoa and wrapped them in soft blankets, and for the first time in a long time, I saw their shoulders relax. They weren't on guard anymore. They were home, even if it was just for one night. I didn't sleep a wink. I just sat there watching them sleep and thinking about everything. My parents, Patrick, the condo, the money. It all felt so distant now, like it had happened to someone else. It felt like a lifetime ago. When the sun came up, it was Christmas Day. I had a small suitcase packed with a few of their favorite things. We didn't have a tree or presents or a big family breakfast, but we had each other. We went for a walk to a nearby park. The air was crisp and cold, and the ground was dusted with a light layer of snow. We held hands and walked in silence, just taking in the simple beauty of a new day. For the first time, I felt like we were starting over, a real beginning with no past to hold us back. When we got back to the apartment, I knew it was time. I took a deep breath and turned my phone back on. The screen lit up and I watched my heart pounding in my chest as the notifications started to pour in. I had 39 missed calls. 39. Most of them were from my mom and dad. A few were from Patrick. The voicemails were even worse. I listened to them one by one. each one a little more desperate than the last. The first one was from my dad, his voice full of disbelief. "Catherine, what is going on? We got your note. You're being ridiculous. Please call us back." The next one was from my mom, her voice a little more frantic. "Catherine, where are you? Where are the kids? We are worried, sick. This is a cruel joke, honey. Please call us back. We need to talk." Then came a voicemail from Patrick, his voice full of pure rage. "You're a sociopath, Catherine. You know that, right? What the hell is wrong with you? We need to talk. Right now." The voicemails went on and on. Each one a little more desperate, a little more angry, a little more pathetic than the last. I could hear the shock in their voices, the complete and utter disbelief that I would actually do this. They had never believed I would leave. They had never believed I would actually cut them off. They had always thought I was just a source of money, a resource they could exploit. But I was more than that. I was a person, and I was a mother. I had a few text messages too. They were just as bad as the voicemails. "Catherine, we can't believe you would do this. Your father is having a panic attack. You need to call him," the bank called. "Our accounts are frozen. Why are you doing this to us? Please call us back. We can fix this. Just call us back." The last one was from my mom. It said, "Please, Catherine, just tell me you'll call me back. We need you. We need you now. Please." I just stared at the screen, a small, sad smile on my face. They needed me. They needed me because I was their paycheck. They needed me because I was the one who was going to clean up their mess. They needed me because I was the one who was going to save them from their own stupidity. But I wasn't going to do it. Not anymore. I had done it for 32 years. I was done. I deleted the voicemails and the text messages without a second thought. I turned the phone off again and put it in my purse. I wasn't going to talk to them. Not now. Not ever. I had a plan and I was going to follow it. Later that afternoon, I received a call from my lawyer. He had sent over a formal letter notifying them that they had 2 weeks to vacate the premises and that all financial support had been terminated. He told me they had been trying to get a hold of him all morning, but he had refused to take their calls. It felt good to know that I had people on my side. I was no longer fighting this alone. I spent the rest of Christmas Day with my kids. We watched a movie, ate pizza, and laughed. We were a family. A small, tiny family, but a family all the same. We were safe. And we were free. We had finally left the place where we were nothing. We were going to a new home, a new life. And this time we were going to build it all on our own. It was a new beginning, and it was going to be the best Christmas of our lives. The next few weeks were a quiet blur. We settled into our new temporary home, a small furnished apartment I had rented through a friend. It was nothing fancy, but it was ours. The kids were happy, and that was all that mattered. They were no longer walking on eggshells. They were no longer whispering in their own home. They were just kids again, playing and laughing and being themselves. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe. I spent my days at work and my evenings with my kids. I ignored the constant stream of calls and texts from my parents and Patrick. I didn't need to hear their desperation. I knew what was happening. I knew they were panicking, and I knew they were scrambling to find a way to get me back. The first blow came a week after Christmas. I was at work sitting in my office when I got a call from my lawyer, Mr. Thompson. "Miss Hayes," he said, "I have some news. Your brother Patrick has filed a lawsuit against you. He's trying to claim a stake in the property." I just sighed. I wasn't surprised. I knew this was coming. "On what grounds?" I asked. "He's claiming that the condo was a gift to the family," Mr. Thompson said. "That your parents were given a verbal agreement that they had a permanent right to live there. It's a flimsy case, Miss Hayes. He doesn't have a leg to stand on." "I know," I said. "But what about my parents? Are they on his side?" "They're on his side," Mr. Thompson said. "They're claiming that you are in breach of a familial contract. It's ridiculous, of course. We have the deed to the property, and we have your bank statements. The money you gave them was a gift. The law is very clear on this. We have a very solid case. I just listened, a quiet sense of triumph growing in my chest. They were so desperate. They were so blinded by their own entitlement that they thought they could just sue me and win. They thought they could use the law against me, the woman who had always followed the rules. The case went to court. It was a long, tedious process. The lawyers for my parents and Patrick were relentless. They tried to paint me as a cold, heartless woman who had abandoned her family. They talked about how I had left them with nothing, how I had turned my back on them. They brought up my divorce. They brought up my kids. They tried to make me look like a monster. But I was ready for them. My lawyer, Mr. Thompson, was a bulldog. He had all the documents. He had the deed to the property. He had the bank statements. He had everything. He just laid it all out there calmly and methodically. He showed the judge that I was the sole owner of the property. He showed the judge that I had paid for every single thing. He showed the judge that I had been sending them a monthly allowance for years. And then he dropped the bomb. He presented the evidence of Patrick selling company secrets to my competitor, Stanford Pediatrics. He showed the judge the bank statements with the deposits from the rival company, and he explained what it was for. The courtroom was silent. Patrick's lawyer looked at him, his face a mask of shock and disbelief. Patrick just sat there, his face pale, his eyes wide with fear. He had been caught. He had been exposed. The golden child, the man who could do no wrong, was a criminal. The judge just looked at them with a sense of pure disdain. He looked at my parents, who were sitting there with a look of complete and utter betrayal on their faces. They had let this happen. They had known. They had known their son was a thief, and they had let it happen. They had put their son above me, above my company, above my future. And they had lost. The judge ruled in my favor. The case was dismissed. The condo was mine. The money was mine. My family was a mess, and I had nothing to do with it anymore. I had won, but it wasn't a win that felt good. It felt empty. It was a win that was built on the wreckage of my family. After the hearing, I walked out of the courtroom. My parents were there. They looked old and tired. Patrick was there. He looked scared and defeated. He looked at me, and his eyes were full of a new kind of hatred. "You did this," he said. His voice a whisper. "You did this to me." I just looked at him. "No, Patrick," I said. "You did this to yourself." I walked away. I had won the battle, but I knew the war was far from over. I had to build a new life for my kids. A life that was built on love, not on money. I had to teach them what it meant to be a family, a real family. A family that was built on trust, not on a lie. I walked away. I had won the battle. But I knew the war was far from over. I had to build a new life for my kids. A life that was built on love, not on money. I had to teach them what it meant to be a family, a real family. A family that was built on trust, not on a lie. 6 months had passed since that day in the courtroom. It felt like a lifetime ago. We had moved into a new house, a small 2-story place with a big backyard in a quiet neighborhood. It was nothing fancy, but it was ours. The walls were painted in bright, happy colors. The furniture was comfortable and new. And there was a beautiful black piano in the living room, a brand new one I had bought for Haley. She loved it. She would sit there for hours, her little fingers flying over the keys, and the sound of her music would fill the house with joy. Jake was doing so well. He had made new friends at school. He was playing baseball and he was happy. He wasn't walking around with that scared look in his eyes anymore. He was a kid again. A happy, laughing kid. We were a family again, a small, tiny family, but a family all the same. We had our own little traditions. We would have movie night on Friday, pizza night on Saturday, and we would always eat dinner together at the table. We would talk and laugh and share our day. It was everything I had ever wanted. The first few months were hard. I had to deal with the aftermath of my decision. The condo sold quickly, but it was a long, messy process. I had to deal with the lawyers and the paperwork and the constant calls from my family. I had to deal with the sadness of knowing that I had to do this. But I had no regrets. Not one. I knew I had done the right thing. As for my family, I don't know much about them now. I cut all contact. I blocked their numbers. I blocked them on social media. I didn't want to know. I didn't need to know. But I heard things. Little whispers from mutual friends. Little tidbits of information that made their way back to me. Patrick and Lauren had split up. The pressure of having no money, no place to live, and a baby had been too much for them. Patrick had lost his job after the lawsuit, and Lauren had to move back in with her parents. My parents had to sell all their things just to pay for a tiny apartment. They were living off of their savings, which were running out quickly. They had nothing now, no house, no money, no family. They were alone. I don't know if they regret what they did. I don't know if they ever think about what they did to me and my kids. But I don't need to know. What they did was unforgivable, and what I did was necessary. I had to do it. I had to do it for my kids. I had to do it for me. I had to do it to show them that I was not their bank account. I was not their doormat. I was a person. And I was a mother. I have learned so much in the last 6 months. I have learned that family is not just about blood. It is about love and respect and loyalty. It is about standing up for the people you love. It is about protecting your children from the people who would hurt them. And it is about not letting anyone, not even your own parents, tell you that you are not enough. Sometimes, the greatest betrayals lead to the most necessary departures. What had seemed like an ending the day we packed our bags and left my parents' house had actually been a beginning of self-respect, of true independence, of showing my children what it meant to stand up for yourself and for those you love. We had come through the storm and found ourselves on solid ground at last. Have you ever had to make a difficult decision to protect your family's well-being? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to hear more real-life stories of overcoming family challenges. Remember, sometimes the bravest thing you can do is pack your bags and create the life you and your children deserve. Thank you for listening, and may you always find the courage to stand up for what is right, especially when it is difficult.